All right, today we are cracking open one of the most important and maybe one of the most overlooked documents in Indian governments. We're talking about the Fundamental and Supplementary Rules, or the FRSR. Just think of it like an employee handbook, but for an entire nation of civil servants. It's a big deal. Let's dive in.
I mean, really, just pause and think about that for a second. How on earth do you create a single rulebook that manages the entire career of millions of government employees, from the day they start to the day they retire? Well, that is the huge job that the FSR takes on.
So what is this thing at its core? Well, the FSRs are the general rules for any government servant whose pay is, and this is the key phrase, debitable to the civil estimates. Now, that sounds like a bunch of jargon, I know, but it pretty much just means if your paycheck comes from the main, non-military government budget, then yep, these rules apply to you. And they cover everything, literally, your entire career. To really get our heads around what we're dealing with, we got to look at two things: its massive scale and its surprisingly deep history.
First off, just the size of it. We're talking about 130 fundamental rules here. 130. This is not some little memo. It's a super detailed framework that's meant to cover pretty much any situation you can think of in a public servant's life.
And here's the wild part. These rules went into effect on January 1st, 1922. You heard that right, 1922. We are looking at a system that was set up during the British Raj, and it's still the foundation of civil service administration in India today. Incredible.
Okay, so we've got this rule book that's 100 years old and has 130 rules, but who exactly has to follow them? And this is a really important question because the answer is not everybody who works for the government.
It all circles back to that one key phrase, debatable to civil estimates. This is the main filter. It's the line in the sand that decides if you're under the FRSR's authority or not.
In this slide, it just lays out that dividing line perfectly. On the left, in the Applies To column, you've got who's in. Your core civil servants, right? And also some other specific groups like some civilians who get paid from the defense budget. The president can even decide to add more groups to this list. But then, look over on the right. It's very clear who's out. Anyone who's governed by separate Army or Marine regulations, this book isn't for them. So the big takeaway is, it covers a massive population, but it's also very specific.
Okay, so if these rules are from 1922, you might be thinking they're totally rigid and inflexible. But that's where you'd be wrong. There's actually a fascinating power structure built right into the system that allows for a lot of flexibility. So let's take a look at who gets to pull the levers.
This little phrase right here from Fundamental Rule 5A is the key that unlocks the whole system's flexibility. Undue hardship. This is the built-in safety valve. It's the official acknowledgement that, hey, maybe a rule from a century ago isn't always going to be fair today, and it gives the legal justification to make an exception. So how does this actually work? Well, it's a pretty clear three-step ladder. First, the government itself can step in and relax a rule if it's causing that undue hardship. But, and this is important, they need the Ministry of Finance to agree. Next, the government can delegate some of its power down the chain to its officers to let them make decisions on the ground. But right at the very top of the pyramid, the absolute final say on how to interpret any of these rules, that power belongs only to the president.
You know, when you put all these pieces together, you realize the FRSR is not some dusty old rule book sitting on a shelf. It's actually a dynamic, living system. It was designed from the very beginning with a solid set of rules, but also with this really smart system of checks, balances, and escape hatches that let it keep working generation after generation.
And this all leaves us with a really fascinating final thought. When a rule from way back in 1922 creates what we call undue hardship in today's world, the system actually has a way to deal with it. But that solution is shaped by this very clear hierarchy of power. It really makes you wonder, at the end of the day, who truly gets to decide what is fair?